This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Mark Weatherford. He's an American cybersecurity professional, and he has held some very high positions in both the public and private sector. He was appointed as the first Deputy Undersecretary for Cybersecurity at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security from 2011 to 2013. Bottom line, Mark brings a wealth of experience and insight into something that we all have to worry about in this day and age. All of our vital information, our personal information, our creative information, our legal information, anything and everything from words to pictures to videos, our personal life, our life is open to hacking. Mark gives insights and ideas about how everything is unfolding and steps we can take to try and mitigate the risk. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Mark Weatherford. My start, for me, was receiving one of those AOL discs in 1994, 1995, right? And then very shortly thereafter, I put up a website. Very shortly thereafter, I had a T1 connection, servers. I was running Ethernet cable through a home office. I kind of had a feel for how things worked. In terms of that basic setup, though, the basic setup of how information comes into our homes, the server setup, I know for the server setup, for example, the operating systems, just the basic setup of a data farm, not a lot has changed in terms of that basic setup since the mid-1990s, has it?
Wow, I hadn't thought of it like that, but you're right. I mean, the basic stuff, the basic infrastructure, the basic software is the same. I mean, it's certainly a lot more efficient now. It's a lot prettier, moves a lot faster. We can do video a lot better. But, the fundamentals are pretty much the same. I mean, you get an email account. Somebody manages that for you probably. Hopefully you have a bit of the security infrastructure in place to protect your home environment or your work environment, and that has certainly changed a lot. But yeah, kind of the basic building blocks are exactly what they've been.
I bring that up because in terms of improvements, one of the things that we always have to deal with when we get into this topic of cybersecurity is legacy issues. And the legacy foundation is what it is. I mean, I don't think people necessarily think what is happening when they access Facebook, but they are going to some server farm, probably somewhere where Mark Zuckerberg has figured out that he can cool his servers without spending a ton of money. But there's this, it's basically the same process as me and my early servers, but on a massive scale.
No, that's for sure. I would say, and talking about the legacy part of it, when we think of some of the other infrastructures in place that we depend upon today, like electricity and water and some of these things that we have layered digital technology on top of it to make it work better, more efficiently. But the underlying infrastructure, even of things like that, is still, as old as it was. In fact, my friend Tim Roxy often says, if they would have told us it was going to be critical infrastructure 40 years ago, we might have built it differently.
There you go. You know what? Since you bring up infrastructure as one of the topics I wanted to jump into today, let's go there. And let's use an example of a place that I visited in the last handful of years, and that'd be the Hoover Dam, the big one outside Vegas. Going there and, you see, you don't really expect to see all the crazy power lines hanging all over like a Godzilla movie or something. But, you immediately realize, okay, wow, what's the tech behind this? And I guess this would be the question for you, for people out in the audience to imagine, is it possible that the operation of a dam like that, and I think back to the mid-1990s using my remote control software like Timbuktu, where you could access someone else's screen and all that kind of stuff. But is it possible for the operations of something, critical infrastructure, the Hoover Dam, is it possible that could be accessed outside the U.S., inside the U.S., by a non-state actor, by a terrorist? Is this possible in this day and age?
Well, of course it's possible. I mean, that's the reason that I'm in the business that I'm in, is to try to prevent those kind of things. But of course, that is possible. That's one of the one of the most important things that we worry about today is the disruption of those kinds of critical infrastructures that society depends upon. We had an event a couple of years ago. It was the Stuxnet event in Iran, where we had a cyber event that actually resulted in physical damage. In the case of a dam or many other kinds of critical infrastructures like that, sure, it's possible, and that's one of the things that we are very, very concerned about today, is putting the kind of controls and compensating controls were necessary to prevent these things from happening. I would never ever say that something can't happen, because we know that it can, and a lot of people spend a lot of time and a lot of money testing and putting the controls in place to prevent and give them visibility to see when the vulnerabilities show up, so that they can mitigate them. But quite frankly, I wait every day for that next big event to happen, because having spent a lot of time in many of these critical infrastructure companies, I see where the vulnerabilities are and where the weaknesses and gaps are, and the companies see them too. Everybody's working hard, but this is not easy stuff. It's not. There's no white smoke. We have a Pope kind of a solution for cybersecurity. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of time to understand what the vulnerabilities are, and then put the mitigating controls in place to address those.
Let me bring up Stuxnet. If I recall from memory, this was an operation put into place by our intelligence community, and essentially it tricked the engineers in Iran into thinking their nuclear systems were acting in a certain way, but they were actually acting in the wrong way. And essentially our worm, or our software error that we kind of snuck into their system, essentially caused internal damage to the physical machinery, correct?
Yeah, and I would caveat that with allegedly.
Well, you have worked in the government for a long time. I know there's got to be a little political to you. You got to be careful about this. I understand.
I did. I spent a good deal of my career in the intelligence community, but that doesn't really have any bearing on this. But yeah, essentially what happened though, and this is a case where we're 99% secure equals 100% vulnerable, because what happened there was essentially a worker at the plant, at the facility in Natanz, was brought in a thumb drive, and that thumb drive had Stuxnet on it, and when he put it in a computer, it infected the entire environment, and I think it destroyed something like 980 of the centrifuges. It was very well conceived and very well executed, that the virus looked for a specific type of equipment, and when it found that equipment, it would essentially speed up and slow down the centrifuge, and over the course of time, the centrifuges, they just started disintegrating internally, and again, that was the physical damage part that resulted from a cyber event.
And that is an example of one that we know. I can only imagine, and I'm sure there's things you can only tell us and not tell us, but I can only imagine that example if I kind of just think of it in my mind expanding out over the last who knows how many decades, that was not the first and only type event that took place like that, either, quote, for our side or, quote, for the other side. This type of cyber intrusion, cyber attacks, this has been par for the course for a long time. This is what aggressive nation states that are trying to protect their interests and perhaps the ones that want to argue that they're trying to keep the world a peaceful place. This is what happens, correct?
Yeah, I would maybe correct it just a little bit. The Stuxnet was the first documented case of physical destruction. But like no one wants to
admit if they've been burned down by right? I mean, so this is the one people admitted to.
Yeah, but right on the heels of Stuxnet in 2012 was the Shamoon event in Saudi Arabia, again, allegedly at the hands of the Iranians, that they infected Saudi Aramco and Razgas, basically bricked like 30,000 machines. It took them several years to recover from that. Just a couple of months ago, October and November of last year, a new piece of malware dubbed Shamoon 2 has been infecting Saudi Arabia over the last couple of months. In fact, I was just in Riyadh a couple of weeks ago, and they are spending some significant time right now understanding and trying to clean up after Shamoon 2.
We could go in a lot of different examples, but I think I want to bring up an example, though, that I think will bring the audience even more in, because it's a little controversial. It's a little interesting. It's been in the news. And I think given your background, I mean, look, we've all got a political perspective, but given your cybersecurity background, your IT background, I think you could probably map this out in a way that both sides can understand and feel comfortable that you're kind of giving the facts. And what I would love for you to map out, to the extent that you know, and I know you've followed it a lot closer than I have, Hillary Clinton's home server. Could you map out for the audience what she had and what she was doing? Just kind of describe the server situation. I think that became such a hotly political discussion that there's still just a kind of the basic issue of security, and perhaps one could even speak to the idea of, okay, well, if you're going to have your own server, perhaps there's reasons for that. But if you're going to have your own server, why would you, if one has the resources, why would someone pick the kind of, lowest of the low end for a service provider where one could afford, if you want to take your communications outside the government, Hillary Clinton could surely afford the best. Could you kind of lay out this scenario for people can understand it? And this is not a political point. I really think it's more of an understanding of what was going on, and we could perhaps, it leads people into understanding like how difficult this whole scenario is of security.
To start, I would, I probably can't say anything that hasn't already been said, but it's puzzling. It was probably a mild word to understand why someone would do that. And as you said, why they wouldn't, build Fort Knox around it. My friend Chris Blask has a saying. He says, like, if you're going to do something that's a little bit edgy there, from an infrastructure perspective, you should be monitoring it like a convicted criminal in solitary confinement. In this specific case, there's a big question mark in my mind about why. Now, you can think of a lot of political reasons about why someone might do something like that.
Hey, Mark, could you explain exactly what she did, though, so people have that foundation?
Sure. She hired a company to build an email server and essentially put it in her basement, apparently, and manage it out of her basement. Now, again, this isn't something that somebody is looking at or touching on a daily basis. They're remotely managing this server, probably, which, of course, that's what makes everybody concerned. Is if I can remotely manage something, guess what? Somebody else may be able to remotely manage that as well. Basically, they set up a computer and wanted it geographically, apparently on the premises. again, for whatever reason, your guess is as good as mine, remotely managed, and then probably, I mean, there's been tons of speculation on this that everybody in the world had their way with that server. And, if I can see a server, if I can see a device from the internet, then if I can touch it, I can probably own it. So that's been the assumption in the security community anyway for a long time, is that probably a lot of people were touching that server.
Let me drill in there on a specific thing. I can think back to myself. I actually, in my own little world, I halted several lawsuits by at least having an IP understanding. So, for example, I had several emails come in years back where somebody was trying something nefarious, but I was able to kind of like look at their email source stuff and figure out the IP, and you kind of could narrow down who the person was. And so, right from the very beginning, if you take your server and you take it away from, for example, the government area, and one can argue about the security there. That's a whole different issue. But if you remove the server from that area and you put it in your own personal residence, you have now just told everybody you're on an island, and you're on an IP island. You're away from everything else, and that alone seems like not only did it for just even the most simple of enterprising individual would immediately know, my God, the physical hardware is in an unsecure residential home.
Sure.
I mean, that, and you can learn, I mean, like a basic high school student could figure that out.
Yeah, exactly right. And again, that's one of the very puzzling things about that. And I'm sure that at some point somebody convinced them that this was an okay thing to do, or maybe they were able to assure them that if you go down this road, there are certain things that we can do to protect this. You listen, when NSA can get hacked, when the CIA can get hacked, when DHS and OPM, and these are organizations that are spending, literally tens of millions of dollars on security. When these organizations can get hacked, an individual citizen has very little chance of combating some of the threats that they're seeing targeting them on a regular basis.
You would also have to think in her situation, it doesn't look that well thought out, and I think that's the real interesting issue here, is that we all want to trust that the other guy is taking care of something, right? But if we ourselves don't have some basic understanding of security, we're all at risk. And I mean, I really don't think a future candidate for president of the United States of America really wanted to put a server in her house that would then open up Pandora's box and cause her to have to answer questions about it for the next bunch of years. I don't think she wanted that, but it's amazing that it speaks to an almost absolute zero understanding of IT technology.
Yeah, and I think, that's probably the first point, but the second point is, somebody should be ashamed. Whoever was in charge of protecting this thing should be ashamed of the job they did, because obviously it was an ill-conceived plan to begin with. And then, as I said, there are plenty of things you can do to protect your infrastructure. It just didn't appear that they had put any of those kind of controls in place.
Mark, let me shift you out of that. Let me shift you out to a rather big picture issue, and then we'll work back into some cyber security issues as well. I had a guest on my show a while back. He wrote a book called The Deep State. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. I've seen plenty of interesting things behind the scenes in the D.C. area. We could probably share some stories if we weren't on this call. It'd be more interesting, perhaps, but that's just the way life is. But talk about your perspective. I mean, to me, it feels like, especially, and this is kind of a really big picture governmental issue, but it feels like that we have Congress, we have the judiciary, we have the executive branch, but it feels like we have the permanent bureaucracy branch these days. And that permanent bureaucracy branch can be those working for the government They can be the assorted Beltway bandits that live near where I own a house in Virginia. But there's this bureaucracy branch that has a lot of power. Is it wrong to think that there is something that, and look, people could have different definitions, but is it wrong to think that there is something to the deep state?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm not I'm not a tinfoil hat guy, but I think well, look at it like this. One of the most affluent counties, or several of the most affluent counties in the United States, are right around the DC metro area. Now, whenever money aggregates like that should be a question in your mind. There's something happening there when that much money is localized in such a small area like that. So that's one piece of that. Without my opinions are as good as anybody else's opinion. In fact, I think my opinions are better, just like most other people do. I think that that there is an undercurrent in the government that sometimes is puzzling to see why things happen. I worked in the government for a couple of years, and it was challenging at best to try to get things done. And you could see decisions being made that had really no rationale behind them. Even, look at legislation that gets introduced today, or look at even executive orders that get introduced. I was involved with a few of these things, and I can tell you that the end product is rarely in the same universe as the beginning product. There's horse trading that goes on between certainly between the executive branch and the legislative branch to ensure, one, that they get enough support to get something through. But oftentimes there are interesting circumstances, well, why did that happen? Why did this not get included and this did? Oftentimes there's probably logical, lobbying reasons for that, but other times it's very puzzling what happened. Again, you can put your tinfoil hat on and question these kinds of things all day long. I think we'd be naive to not believe that there's very powerful people that have a say in a lot of things that may not make sense to the common citizen.
I might not get more from you, but I think that was a fairly strong deep state statement. I mean, look. I
haven't read that book, but I'm going to go get it now.
He doesn't make the case that it's nefarious. He just makes the case that there's tentacles everywhere and there's a vested self-interest. And for example, you mentioned the counties surrounding DC. I think it's 6 of the 10 top wealthiest counties in America surround DC. I mean, I own property in Fairfax. It's just amazing. This is the land of $1.8 million McMansions. It's the land of federal employees that can never be fired. They retire with 80% of their salary. And you're right, when you get behind the scenes and you look at some of the productivity, it would cause people in the private sector to just pull their hair out. I always say that if the rest of the country truly understood the wealth building inside the DC area, I think pitchforks would be out. And that's not a partisan issue. That's just really I should have to hold that back. When I say it's not a partisan issue, Fairfax County, Virginia, as I said, like one of the top 5 wealthiest counties in the country, that county voted 60 to 70% Republican in the early 90s and is completely flipped in less than a generation. So I think you could make some argument about partisan issues there for sure. But it's an amazing issue that if people have never grown up in that area, to not have a handle on the wealth. And it's not typical wealth. It's wealth that is almost guaranteed because the money keeps coming to the government and they keep doling it out and nobody gets fired.
I used to make this statement, even when I was in government, it got me in trouble a few times, that the D.C. area is 61 square miles. That 61 square miles thinks that they understand better than the rest of the entire United States how decisions should be made. That should be perplexing enough to people that there seems to be so much high opinions of their brain trust there that they can make decisions for the rest of the United States without really having to spend a lot of time justifying that.
Let me take you back into, because we could go that direction for a long while, but I want to take you back into some of your expertise here and get back into cybersecurity and some issues that have been in the news. I brought up Hillary Clinton. That's kind of a minor issue compared to Mr. Putin. Mr. Putin dominates the news, and the Russians are everywhere and they're hacking everyone. Trump is connected in some way, and who the hell knows what the exact truth is. But from what I can understand from news coverage out there, the Russians, whoever, quote, the Russians were, this could have been private interest, public interest. I don't know. I've not seen the intelligence. But there has been a lot of reporting that there were intrusions by Russian interests into assorted U.S. systems during the election cycle. From what I understand, one of those would be the DNC being hacked. Another would be Podesta's Gmail being hacked. From what I understand about Podesta's Gmail being hacked, this is if he would have just followed normal protocols, he would have never been hacked. Which, I guess state actors could just always be trying to see if they catch a fish. So that one seems a little unusual, but perhaps you can speak to both from a cybersecurity standpoint. What exactly happened with the DNC? What exactly happened with Podesta's account? Again, I don't really see this as political. It's more informative. For both of these situations, though, it surely seems like, yeah, we can blame somebody else for doing it, but we're doing this all day long to other countries and other nation states too. It seems like, though, that the real blame should be on the individuals to some degree that got hacked. I mean, what was going on at the DNC? I mean, was this just, kind of come on in, guys, we're open for business, take what you want?
I'm not going to make excuses or defense for anybody because, this was a kind of a goat rope from day one. The FBI called the DNC, don't remember the exact timeline, but called the DNC and said, "Hey, you guys need to pay attention. It looks like there's some interesting things happening in your environment." The guy that answered the phone, he was a part-time IT administrator. He looked and he didn't see anything, and the FBI called dozens of times over the next 9 months, and he basically blew it off, wasn't paying attention to it. Now, you can also say, why didn't the FBI walk a half mile down the street, knock on the door and say, "Hey, we really need to talk. There's something going on here." From a political perspective, there's blame to go around all over the place. I can speak to this with a little bit of experience. Back in, I think it was 2008, I was in Colorado. I was the CISO for the state of Colorado at the time, and we held the DNC, the Democratic National Convention in Denver, and we started planning months in advance for how we were going to host the convention, what kind of security controls were going to be put in place, et cetera, et cetera. And I can remember thinking, in fact, I didn't write anything. I had thought about writing a piece on this before the elections last year and saying, both the RNC and the DNC should really be putting the right kind of resources against this. And of course, obviously they didn't. In this specific case, though, this is almost classic. It's almost classic in that I can go to 100 companies today and find the exact same situation. And that's where, you've got 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 IT guys, and they're literally scrambling from dusk to dawn just to get their daily work done. And security is kind of one of those things they do if they have time to do it. That was absolutely the case here. Hopefully this will change in the future. But, when you're not applying the right kind of resources, you're not buying the right kind of security tools, you're not hiring the right kind of people to protect this, shame on you. I almost want to say you deserve it. I mean, that would be too harsh to say that, but this should have been expected. I guarantee you there was nobody in the security community that I know that was surprised by this.
The penetration of the DNC, the penetration of Podesta's account Speak to the sophistication needed here so people have a frame of reference. Were both of these penetrations could only be engineered with a state actor, or were these penetrations and the security on both of these systems such that, frankly, a Kim.com or some he's actually probably would have quite sophisticated tools, but could a very smart guy at a local university have got in?
I've been saying for several years now that, anybody with a laptop and Wi-Fi access can look like a nation state. And in this case, this was just a simple phishing exercise where, other people are managing Podesta's email account because he got so many emails that there was somebody kind of doing filtering for him and telling him which ones he should respond to. He got an email and it appeared to be from an administrator and said, your password appears to have been compromised. Change your password now. The person that got this, the person that was monitoring his account, went to someone else in the DNC and said, is this legitimate or not? Well, the guy on the other end said, yes, it's legitimate. Change the password now. Well, it was an obvious phishing attempt. So as soon as they changed the password, whoever had sent that mail compromised the account. They owned the account. So they were able to go and look at, all 60,000 or whatever number of emails that he had in his account. And they basically owned his email account from that point on. Here's where it gets a little bit tricky and a little bit fishy because, those are the emails that subsequently were leaked by WikiLeaks. Now, how did WikiLeaks get them? There was the hacker Guccifer came into the picture at some point. He was fairly quickly determined to be a fake, and that's why it was eventually determined that this was in fact Russians were behind this, behind the attack. They're the one they had set up. They had fronted for Guccifer, and then eventually they had taken all of the data, all of the information, and given it back over to WikiLeaks, ostensibly, so WikiLeaks could do exactly what they did, which is start spilling it and sharing it all out.
The one thing I've not heard about this particular period of time was Podesta the only one that got this email? Were other people compromised? They haven't told us that.
I'm on shaky ground right now, but I think there were a few other people that were compromised, but Podesta's were the most damaging. Again, because he had such a trove. I mean, he had all of his history, 60,000 emails in his inbox. It was a literal trove. Of course, what we did see with that is, and this is what I tell people all the time, don't ever put anything in an email that you would be embarrassed to see in the public, because there were a whole lot of other people that got splashed back on this because their emails were in Podesta's account. The people that talked were disparaging of Hillary Clinton and other people. Their emails were in there, and they ended up being embarrassed by the thing, even though it was Podesta's account that was compromised.
And I think you could speak to this too. I think for anybody listening right now that might be saying to themselves, I'm a Republican. I'm smarter than that. We never would have made those mistakes. This cybersecurity issue is nonpartisan, huh?
Yeah, to move this into the corporate world, people tell me all the time, well, why would anybody be interested in me? There's nothing I have that's of any interest. And I said, listen, you're living in a universe that no longer exists. Everybody has something. And in fact, if you don't have anything interesting, why are you in business? Why are you protecting anything you have? Yeah, people are far more naive than they have a right to be when it comes to this, because this could happen to anybody. In fact, I can remember even talking to people about this back in October when we first started hearing about this. I said, man, the Republicans need to be very, very careful right now, because, there but for the grace of God go I. This could very easily splash over on them. And quite frankly, I'm surprised it didn't. Again, that's probably a bigger story than than just the DNC hack at that point.
With your background, I can move you around a lot on a lot of different issues, and I will continue to do that as I'm going to move right now into something that I think is near and dear to your current day analysis. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I've got this kind of rudimentary experience of understanding how the Ethernet cables hook up to the servers and all that kind of stuff. And to a large degree, I would think that for most of my adult business life, I have participated in some way in a form of cloud computing. I mean, this is, a lot of my world has been online. Speak to the cloud today, though. This is, people, it's still a little bit of a jargony term for most people, but essentially we're moving towards a place where instead of really ever pondering that, for example, if I was Hillary Clinton to put a server in my bathroom, that kind of thinking is going to move farther and farther away. And we are moving to a place where our critical information, our personal information is no longer going to be in a place that any of us can physically touch. Meaning like, okay, here's my laptop or here's my server. I can touch it. I can imagine my hard drive is inside there. And as long as it's in my bedroom and it's not plugged into an Ethernet cable and the Wi-Fi is not on, I can protect it. That's going to be a dinosaur in the not too distant future, if not already moving there in a rapid fashion.
People ask me all the time, why are we doing this? Why are we going down this road? And the answer I give them is, it really doesn't matter what we think. It's going to happen. It's the tsunami of technology. There is too much efficiency and there's too much economic benefit to using the cloud. So suck it up and just pretend that you like it. Cisco has put out a report every year for the last, 2 or 3 years. I think it's called their cloud security report or something like that. Anyway, the one that came out in December of 2016, just a couple of months ago, said that 92% of all computing workloads will be processed in a cloud by 2020. In 3 very, very short years, 92% of everything that we do is going to be processed in a cloud. Now, whether that's a public cloud or a private cloud it really doesn't matter. But to your point, and it's exactly right, to your point, most consumers, most citizens, they're simply, when you look at, even today, you look at Google, you look at Facebook, you look at Yahoo, you look at Snap, you look at, all of these social media applications and sites. This is all in the cloud. All of your information is out there. Once it exists out there, guess what? It ain't coming back.
It's a lot of trust, isn't it?
It's a lot of trust. I try to limit the amount of stuff that I put out on some of the social media sites, but it's really, really hard. To your point, yes, the answer is in a very short time, the thought of having privacy of your information is simply going to be gone. And that doesn't mean even that it's something that you're doing. Think about all of your credit card information, all of your healthcare information, all of your driving, all of your tax, all of that is going to be in a cloud somewhere.
Which means it will be breached.
Well, I guess I'm not that pessimistic.
You didn't like. I felt that in you.
Listen, I think there was an event 2 weeks ago where one of the big service providers went out for 4 hours. When they went out, every business that depended on them was offline for 4 hours. It's kind of like, when electricity goes out. In the old days, when you had a storm or, a transformer blew on the corner telephone pole or somebody ran into a power line somewhere, and power would go out for a couple of hours, and you'd say, okay, well, let's deal with it. Well, today, we're so dependent upon the internet, and the internet is supported by the cloud, that it's going to be if your company, if your business depends on access, depends on people accessing the cloud to order product or order services, and the cloud goes down, your business goes down. So you have many companies last week, 2 weeks ago, had a 4-hour window where none of their customers could get to them. Now, there's a fairly significant economic impact to something like that. What if this is the power grid? Or what if it's the transmission of water down a pipeline?
Airlines.
Or airlines, or healthcare. You name the critical infrastructure that could be impacted by this. I don't quite think that we're prepared for those ramifications. We haven't even talked about the Internet of Things yet, but the Internet of Things, where we're embedding sensors in literally everything, in manufacturing and electricity and oil and gas and healthcare. These sensors are collecting data and pumping out data 24/7. The privacy implications of that are profound, absolutely profound.
There's another side issue there. As you mentioned, the sensors. Anybody who's ever dealt with a faulty Ethernet cable can extrapolate in their own mind out. My God, if everything's got a sensor on it, and I've dealt with a faulty Ethernet cable before, the world is not foolproof. Things fail.
That's right. You're exactly right. In the electricity industry, we had our kind of premise of at least in the United States is to build resilience into the infrastructure so that you could lose small pieces of the infrastructure, but it would never lose the entire infrastructure. And I don't think we have, and I know we have, and there's no thinking about it. We have not conceptualized that degree of resilience into some of our other critical infrastructures in the nation. When the cloud goes down, we kind of look around at each other and say, okay, what are we going to do now? We can't do anything until the cloud comes back up. It's a dicey future there from that perspective.
Let me break down the cloud a little bit for the audience. Essentially, what you have to imagine is if the local computer or the local server is no longer in your sight lines, it's been moved to a farm, essentially a massive warehouse, where there are servers from floor to ceiling and as many rows as you can imagine, kind of like in the movies, these kinds of things. So we no longer have that kind of natural built-in distributed part of the plan. It's now just everything's housed in one location. It's a central location. I'm just kind of imagining this in my own mind, but if I was in your shoes and I'm advising people and I'm thinking about cybersecurity, not only is there the cybersecurity of, okay, what's going on the bits and bytes inside the drives across the cables, but if we all of a sudden have these server farms, and we already have them, but if we have these server farms that get bigger and bigger and bigger, these become like blinking red lights for the bad guys. Because as you just mentioned, if you take something offline for 4 hours, look at the economic impact. I would think that having server farms, and I can still recall some out in Loudoun County, Virginia, nondescript warehouses. Oh, sure, they have security on the door. You have to use your thumbprint and all that kind of fun stuff. And you get inside, and there's a guy there and that kind of stuff. So it's secure from that basic standpoint. But if somebody showed up with some type of a rocket propelled grenade, or if they showed up with something else to wreak havoc, these data farms, these server farms, to me, they just stand out like, hit me.
Yeah, so that's true. But the good news is that there are no single points of failure. Any of the big ISPs, even the small ISPs, Amazon, Google, Azure, any of them, they have multiple. These things are replicated around the globe. There is not, and I've been in a couple of those places out in Loudoun County, and they're massive and they're incredibly impressive. But those things are replicated in different geographic areas, and the data is replicated as well. And so that's the beauty of that, is it would take some kind of an unspeakable act, to affect all of the data centers around the globe for these different companies to have that kind of an impact.
An amazing redundancy is your point.
Amazing redundancy, absolutely amazing redundancy. But now, what I would say is to compound what you just said is we have moved away from, or we are rapidly moving away from these, I used to call it the Indiana Jones warehouses of server farms. You remember that last scene in the very first Indiana Jones movie. That's what it used to remind me of. But we've moved away from this physical servers, racks and racks and rows of physical servers to virtual environments now. I mean, it's a new kind of technology. It's actually not new. It's been around since 1998. And that's what my company today does. But, virtualization allows you to compress to an unimaginable degree the amount of compute into a computer. We're able to do a lot more with a lot smaller of a footprint. This is where the future is going. Is we're virtualizing the technology, very rapidly virtualizing the technology. I've been saying this for a couple of years now. I think that this virtualization, these clouds, can actually be a catalyst for better security. And the reason I say that, it's not necessarily intuitive. The reason I say that, though, is, these big companies like Amazon and Google and Azure, they are spending 10, 100x what the normal company can spend on security because they cannot afford to have a bad day. If your company has a bad day, a bad security day, that's a bad day for you. If one of these big service providers has a bad day, it's a bad day for thousands, perhaps millions of their customers. They are incentivized to a much greater degree to make sure that the 5 nines or 6 nines of uptime, that they don't breach that they don't fall behind that. So they're incentivized completely differently than most companies are to make sure that they don't have that big event.
Let me take a side tangent for a moment, something a little more personal for you. I've seen you make the comment, I like this, I want you to explain it. Model what you admire. What does that mean to you, and how has it played out in your life?
I try to be a good example, obviously, and we're speaking personally now. I got into this security business. I kind of been in the technology business my entire life, but way back in the early 90s, I was working on my graduate thesis, and I wrote a thesis on information security at the time. Well, as you can imagine, there was not many people writing too much about security back in the early 90s. I kind of latched onto this, and I've become, I think that's what most people would say about me, is that I'm very passionate about this security, and passionate about the people in the security business. I admire technology. I love technology. I think technology is going to help us solve some of our security problems today. They already have to a large degree. Of course, every new revision of technology comes with its own set of problems. So we have to keep iterating to get better and better. I try to be that kind of example. I try to spend time with people that are trying to solve these big problems. I've been in and out of the government several times, and I call myself, kind of like the accidental tourist. I never had any plans to go in the government, and in fact, I never wanted to be in government I never wanted to stay in government when I was there. The people that are doing this security stuff in the government are, for the most part, very, very dedicated, and I think are laudable to a large degree for what they're accomplishing in the face of some pretty intense obstacles in many cases. Go back to our earlier conversation about the differences in the executive and legislative branch. The legislative branch doesn't necessarily make it easy for executive branch agencies to accomplish what they want to do or need to do.
That you bring up an interesting point there in that direction, it makes me think, in your experience, and so much of the DC area is about this, that even if both sides see the problem, see the fix, know the solution, partisanship will come into the middle because the one side that perhaps is in power, the other side that's not in power doesn't want to let them get credit. Do you see on an issue like cybersecurity, has that also devolved into partisan squabbles, or are we still in a place where cybersecurity is something where partisanship is not full blown yet?
Well, I wish I could say it wasn't, but I have seen it. I worked on a couple of bills with Senator Lieberman and Senator Collins when I was there, and it was probably one of the, I don't know, I'm not sure what the right word would be, but we spent about a year working on a piece of legislation, and all of a sudden, I can't even tell you how much effort went into this, thousands of man hours, and then one day it was gone, it was done, and it didn't pass, and it just went away. It was largely due to partisanship. There were things that we were trying to do in the legislation that we just couldn't get everybody on board with it.
Even though it would have been a benefit to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were stretching on a few things. I would never apologize for trying to do the right thing. We were trying to do the right thing. And there's an old saying that says, I can be fired for doing the wrong thing and for doing nothing, and I'd rather be fired for trying to do the right thing. And I felt like that's what we were trying to do. We knew that some of it was going to be a stretch, but those kinds of things happen, all the time. Last year in the last Congress, that ended on January 4th, there were, I think, over 60 different pieces of legislation around cybersecurity and privacy. I'm not a huge, in fact, I'm almost anti-regulatory in many respects. A lot of these things are really, really necessary. I firmly believe that in areas where security and safety of the public are at stake, there's a role for regulation. We're seeing, I think it's fairly obvious that cybersecurity is one of those areas now where citizen safety and security is in fact being implicated in some of this. Certainly when you look at some of the critical infrastructures like we were talking about with dams and electricity and things like that.
I would love for you to compare and contrast government, their IT perspective, the private sector, their IT perspective. I can only imagine that guys like Zuckerberg, the Google guys, Cisco, private companies that have dollars on the line are most likely, I'm sure they're not all created equal, most likely are keeping themselves at the forefront in terms of, because look, it's about money. They have to keep the business going. They have to keep things secure. There's an economic reason behind it. I caught a headline sometime in the last 6 months. I don't know if this is accurate. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like from an accurate news report. Our nuclear weapons program, the U.S. nuclear weapons program, the headlines were that we were still using floppy disks. And it struck me, and I've seen a little bit behind the scenes inside the government sector in D.C. How far away are the private and governmental sectors in terms of their expertise? For example, I mentioned the floppy disks. Is this true, or did you know anything? Have you caught that headline yourself? And would you speak to where we stand on the government side of things? I assume they're behind the private sector.
So I did read that as well, and I can't say as I'm shocked by that. I'm going to go back, we talked about legacy infrastructure a while ago. There are a lot of legacy infrastructures in the nation today, actually around the world today, that are still using very, very old technology. In many cases, it's because it works and they haven't had a need to upgrade it, and security is not always that forcing function. I guess to your point, I think I hate to say it like this, but it depends. There are some organizations in the federal government and at state and local government levels that are wisely, in my mind, prioritizing and spending on cybersecurity, both on people and technology. And then there are others that aren't. You know, in the private sector, I have a term that I call the Fortune 500 and the unfortunate 5,000. The Fortune 500s are the ones that we hear about all the time. The unfortunate 5,000, and it actually is probably the unfortunate 500,000, those are the small and medium-sized businesses around the nation that they're not on the front page of the news every day. They're the ones that I worry about the most, quite frankly, simply because, you know, that's the backbone of our economy. At the same time, these are the companies that don't necessarily have the resources to go out and spend $10 million on infrastructure or go out and hire 5 new or 10 new security people. The government, for the most part, the government has the resources to do that. But again, we are hampered on a regular basis. The government is hampered on a regular basis because who provides the funding for the federal government agencies? The legislature does. This was something I had to spend a lot of time doing it when I was at DHS, was spend time on Capitol Hill kowtowing to the legislative branch, you know, the people that owned my budget and gave me my budget every year. I would have to spend a lot of time justifying to them why I wanted to spend money on this and this and this and this. It's an interesting situation where the legislature can beat the hell out of the executive branch for having security events, but I will bet you that if you followed the trail back every single time these agencies had requested funding or requested resources to address some of these very issues that they're getting beat up for.
You know, you bring up the legislature. I think it's one thing that, you know, since we've kind of covering a lot of territory here, but it's worth pointing out that sometimes in America we hear the phrase Congress or legislature, and we assume that these 500 plus people are, you know, high excellence, competent, etc. And don't get me wrong, I know there's plenty of people in the legislature that are, but there are also plenty of people in the legislature that are literally both sides of the aisle, literally just partisan hacks, incompetent, should never be there. They're just part of a political machine on either side of the aisle, and they're there, and they don't really, I don't think some of them even have the cognitive facility to even deal with some of the issues that you're talking about. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty that do, but you and I both know there are plenty of people that if the average American actually met and sat down behind closed doors with some of these congressional members, they would walk away going, my God, that person is in charge of the country?
You know, I worked in state government I worked in the government in Colorado and in California. When I first got to Colorado and I was, you know, making my rounds around the state legislature and talking to people, I realized this guy's a barber. This guy's a real estate agent. You know, this guy worked in a grocery store. He owned a grocery store.
Nothing wrong with that, but
no, nothing wrong with that. That's not meant to be derogatory. At the same point, these are the people that are now making decisions on how are we spending, you know, millions of dollars on very, very complicated technology stuff. I can't even estimate how much of my percentage of my time was spent educating legislators and their staffs on issues. You know, I would get called all the time by different legislators that wanted to ask me about, okay, I have this request for funding. They want $100 million to do X, Y, and Z. I have no idea what this means. Can you explain it to me? You know, and I found myself oftentimes in that role to be that explainer, that interlocutor, to translate the technical issues around something into something that the legislator could understand and hopefully make a wise decision on.
I was thinking about the movie. Well, first off, I was thinking about deception. And I was thinking about the movie Argo with Ben Affleck back in the Iranian hostage crisis. I was thinking about a guy that I've had on my podcast, Robert Aumann, who won a Nobel Prize for game theory. I was thinking about the concepts of false flags. I think sometimes we all, and the media, and I take all these things together, I think one of the things that we probably all have to realize is that we can hear these headlines in the media, yeah, but behind the scenes, what's really going on. Because deception, I mean, look, if we, for example, I'm you, and I'm helping to either a corporation or a government entity, and I'm helping to protect them. And we know there's bad state actors that are going to try and get in. Well, so then how does one start to analyze and think like and perhaps deceive the bad state actor? There's a lot of different ways that can happen. You can expand the footprint, you can get things more dispersed and kind of confuse people. But there's so many issues here, and I think what I'm trying to get at is that it's not one of these things where you can just take a headline and digest it. I mean, you can try that, but you're not going to really get anywhere. The point is there's so many moving pieces here in your world, in this cybersecurity world. My God, you add game theory and you add people like yourself. You're sitting here trying to advise XYZ government how to protect themselves. Game theories can play a role in how you're advising them, isn't it?
We could have a whole conversation about this right here.
Yeah.
And I think to extrapolate this out just a bit, this is the problem that we're dealing with today around this concept of fake news. In cybersecurity, actually intelligence, let me make it even more broadly. Intelligence is all about deception. That's where, that's one of the biggest challenges that we have as cybersecurity professionals is the ability to think intellectually and understand how to connect those dots. And it's often a puzzle. So thinking logically and operationally is really the key to unraveling some of these things. I was thinking of an example here. Some of my intelligence community friends are going to hate me for saying this, but I'm not violating anything by saying it. But when the recent WikiLeaks disclosures of all of the CIA hacking tools came out, and the media was all up in arms about how could the CIA let this happen. I will have to say the first thing that popped into my mind was, wow, wouldn't this be a cool deception tactic if the CIA released all of this? And all of these tools had homing beacons in them, so now the CIA could know whoever used these things, whenever they used them, and who they were using them against. Now, maybe that's just my warped sense of perspective, but that's a great deception tactic right there. I think about a lot of the things that we're seeing, a lot of the activities, certainly around nation states today, in the cyber arena. You have to wonder how much of this is real and how much of it is, perhaps overblown a bit.
We're never going to know, are we? That's the whole idea.
Yeah, that's it. You talked about it earlier. The challenge of attribution, of actually saying, okay, I have an IP address. Did that IP address? Did the person that it appears? Are they really the ones that use this IP address? And that's really hard to do. In our business, that is really hard to do.
Mark, this is not my expertise. I hope I carried the water okay enough to keep you moving along today.
Yeah, this was good.
Where's the best place for people to reach out? Your firm, to go check you out and what you're up to. And we might have to have a second conversation, perhaps even dig a little bit deeper. We didn't get into some of your current work, but I think it's you and I both know we could go on for a long time on this topic.
Yeah, well, my company is vArmor, VARMOUR, not VMware, vArmor. And we're a cloud security and data center security company. We're a startup in Silicon Valley. We're competing against a lot of the more established companies, but the future is very bright. And we're in the space I talked about in the virtualization and cloud technology space. We are on the leading edge of the next wave of technology, and it's a very, very exciting place to be. I'd love to come back and talk more about that.
Yeah, and I'm about to sharpen my knife a little bit and see if I can get a little bit closer to areas that make you uncomfortable, where you know things that you can't say things. Anyways, Mark, listen, I appreciate it. Thank you for coming on.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Mike.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash, or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.